Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is Friday, May 29th, end of the month, and at least for blueprints I have those videos actually scheduled starting Monday. So starting in the next month, we will actually have some scheduled videos coming out, and I'm gonna use my macros to schedule some of the backlog stuff that I've played but not scheduled and released to get back on track. We'll scroll down the 24-hour peak concurrent chart. Now, I was shocked to see that at the end of the last stream, YouTube is claiming I got 25 new subscribers. So hello to those new subscribers if you are really listening. But my negative instinct, or realistic instinct, makes me suspect that this is just YouTube glitching. For my channel has never, from a live stream, gained more than maybe 2 subscribers. And I don't think I really did anything particularly too special in the last live stream that would have gained that many subscribers. So. Of course, subscribers are pretty much luck-based more than anything else. It's the viewer deciding to want to subscribe to my channel, not me forcing a viewer or even really encouraging a viewer to subscribe. The only other thought is that maybe summer is upon us, and so there is just a fresh batch of people who are looking for new content. Yeah. That's the only other thought, unless there was some kind of like organized effort, which if there was an organized effort, thanks for that, I suppose. As if there was a group of people saying, hey, let's just all subscribe to this one guy. I was actually fairly surprised that my UI Vision macro mostly worked. I only needed to make a couple of tweaks since I last used it, and frankly I don't think I've used it in like 6 months, and it tends to break fairly consistently. I probably made a mistake premiering every single episode, 100+ episode of Blueprints. I think I was more in the idea and the mentality of only premiering the first episode in the series, and I think that does kind of make a little bit more sense, but it happened and I can't really undo it, so we'll leave it as it is. Now we're looking at the most wishlisted games, or the games that have gained the most wishlisted chart. Let's see what else as we try to warm up here. I'm still sleeping in way too late, which is really screwing me over because, like, I need to make phone calls and deal with people who are professionals, and particularly in the area I live in, people call it a day at somewhere between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the entire city's just shut down. Like, it is definitely not a situation where things are open 24/7, which, yeah, if anyone could live in New York, if I could live in New York, that would be one of the major reasons why I might want to live in like New York, Manhattan, is just to be able to actually get some stuff done. Although in fairness, I don't know how much of even Manhattan is actually open when it comes to things that aren't bars and maybe bodegas. But yeah, that's slowing me down. And when I have my macro scheduling videos, my computer can't be doing anything else. Of course, if I built my new computer, then I'd have 2 computers and I could be doing something else at that point. So I did have to jump around and find other things to do. And before I started scheduling things, I was playing Resident Evil 2 Remake, which I am shocked I was able to get back into that game after being sick and taking a month. I wasn't sick for a month, but being sick for a week within a month of playing Blueprints. Like it was really stupid and crazy to take a break in between those games, but not as bad of an issue as I thought it was going to be. Like, I really did think it was going to be a much bigger thing where I would just not be able to even play Resident Evil 2 and I'd just give up and end the series in kind of a quitting fashion. Totally quitting. But no, still, the second story, while it is starting to show that it is fairly different from the first story, when I played as Leon, playing as Claire Redfield, does start to change quite a bit once you get out of the police station, or the majority of the police station, I would say, once you get to the central area and the basement of police station. But then you end up getting back into the police station very fast, and there's still just a very unfun scenario, in that you're getting chased a lot more by who I've been referring to as Mr. X, which also, I guess eventually I've realized that one of my theories as to who that character was can't be right. Yeah, I was thinking Mr. X was the police chief, but now I know for a fact that's not the case on the second story playing as Claire. But yeah, you get a different story, and I imagine that means you would have gotten a very different story if you played as Claire the first time. But Claire does just feel like she's very weak until you get a lot of upgrades, and it doesn't matter how strong she gets, really, because you're just never going to have enough bullets, and they're just going to constantly respawn zombies on you. And I'm playing on the easiest assisted mode, and Mr. X is still totally unkillable and will totally walk up behind you and just punch you in the back of the head, and it's just not a fun experience. And I imagine that is probably somewhat exactly the experience that the original Resident Evil 2 was. And for a remake, I definitely think when Mr. X, a unkillable bad guy, should have shown up, it should have been more of a scripted thing, maybe even a chase sequence thing where you ran through a door and then he would just be too big to get through the door, or too stupid to get through the door. And then, like, every time you saw him until you finally beat him and are capable of beating him, you would just need to run away from him. And QuickTime event even would be a lot better than the no QuickTime event. He's just always chasing you. He can totally get through doors, it seems, or at least he can work a path around doors. I was also expecting him to smash through walls and create new paths, and he never really does that. And it's not like you can really just like run around him. So every time you see him, you're basically going to have to use a grenade launcher on him, or 2 grenades, to just knock him down to his knees, to then run around him to get yourself maybe 30 seconds of reprieve before he starts getting back up and chasing you some more. But yeah, I do think once you get out fully of the police station, you won't have to deal with him, or that's my hope, at all for the rest of the game. And there is an interesting twist, certainly, in that playing as Claire gives you different keys than what you get playing as Leon, which explains a lot of the layout, but that it really also highlights how they are just kind of reusing the same level design twice and making you play the same content or very similar content twice, which in the old days would make a lot of sense, but in the new days with a remake, it perhaps would have been better to just merge Leon and Claire's story together and have it all happen at once. And timeline wise, I don't know if you can say that the second story is happening in parallel to the events of the first story, or if it is just an alternate timeline. Like, it feels more like it's an alternate timeline than it could be parallel. It definitely couldn't be before the events of Leon's story, and it definitely couldn't be completely after the events of Leon's story. Because, yeah, if it was completely after, then Mr. X would be gone completely. And that is really what I was hoping on a New Game Plus, which I guess the second story technically isn't a New Game Plus, but yeah, I was hoping that Mr. X would just be gone and it would be a slower, perhaps more horror run, like Resident Evil Requiem is when you play as the girl versus playing the Leon sections where he's super powerful and just full of bullets and guns. But yeah, I do think I'll finish Resident Evil 2 Remake second run, maybe dip my toe very quickly into any other side games, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to really be able to beat the game on even normal difficulty, so I'm not going to be able to really unlock any stronger guns, and I'm not at this point willing to spend money to buy the DLC to unlock the guns immediately. You probably would have a much better experience even for your first run through if you did buy the DLC to unlock all the guns, because it will just make the game more reasonable as far as the level of difficulty in it. But it may also be the case that there are a lot of Resident Evil people who are old school hardcore fans who are really just great at those kinds of shooting games and can handle it a lot better than I can. I don't think so, and I don't see why a remake should be as difficult or more difficult than the original game, or as difficult as even your average first-person shooter. I would think you would be trying to bring in a new generation, a new audience, and I don't think Resident Evil 2 Remake really does a great job with that at all. Let's see, I'm still playing Wario World. There's a lot of Game Boy Advanced, like connect your Game Boy Advance to GameCube features in Wario World, and I think a lot of the games. And the game itself seems rather short. Yeah, which Wario games in general tend to be kind of short. They definitely are the leftover bits from something like Mario Sunshine, I would imagine, is where all that level design and thoughts came from. Wario, for the most part, is in Wario World playing very similar to Mario. But yeah, even for the fact that the GameCube went to CDs, they only went to mini CDs, which only held like 80 megabytes or so, so you just aren't going to see huge games there, and a lot of it doesn't even have to do with space as much as effort, and so yeah, you're not going to see a huge amount of effort to make huge games if it isn't a Mario game. Yeah, it's probably not high on my priority list to play Mario Sunshine, but if I did, I would almost certainly see 8 to 16 times as much levels than Wario World. Wario World literally seems like it has 8 levels, kind of side-scrolling levels that are small by modern standards, and then 4 boss fights. And unless it unlocks and does something more than that, that's the entirety of the game. Yeah. And me playing Wario World is just another example of just like a lot of games I missed when I was younger that I don't mind playing once now, catching up on some older things, certainly. But I have to be, fairly cautious to really only play like one level when nothing else is going on, and almost certainly it is feeding into my insomnia, is that I'm in the middle of the night, instead of going to sleep, I'm not tired, so I'm just playing an entire level for another hour of Wario World on my Steam Deck. I also, imagine I'm not going to get any of these all of these achievements for Resident Evil 2. I ran into a lot of frame rate in this for Resident Evil 2, and that didn't make any sense to me because I had just opened the app and it felt like maybe too many zombies were on screen at once, or the game glitched. And then it felt like internally the frame rate of Resident Evil 2 dropped considerably, and I was able to use that to kind of cheat. I also watched Spider Noir, which the Amazon Prime app I have on my TV is not working, so it would pop up a box saying, do you want to watch this in black and white or in true hue color versus authentic black and white? I would heavily recommend watching it in color. As someone who was forced to watch it in black and white, it's fine in black and white, but it doesn't actually, I think, add anything. And I think nostalgia certainly doesn't really exist for most people for old black and white noir movies. You will get very bright and colorful pastels that feel organic to the time in color, from what I can see from the color trailer, where all of that color data and all of that prettiness just gets mushed into shades of gray. And it isn't dynamic, sharp shades of gray. There's a big difference between something that was filmed on something like 25mm in black and white, where it has a real sharpness and a real distinctive hue of grays, where it feels very natural, and just desaturating and removing all the colors doesn't have that. No, a lot of that almost certainly is set dressing and design and costuming, and that they are actively having characters have ridiculous makeup on or brightly colored clothes, because when it was originally being captured in black and white, they were overcompensating for that. Where in this case, they're not overcompensating for what it would look like in black and white. They're just taking the color out. And of course, you have to talk about Spider Noir and the elephant in the room, that it's Nicolas Cage playing a Spider-Man-like character set in the past, not Peter Parker, and not really the Spider-Man that you usually would see in comics. There was a comic called Spider Noir. I never read it, so I don't know how close this miniseries is. Nicolas Cage definitely is not going to be my pick for an actor for almost any role. Like, I would have a hard time figuring out what Nicolas Cage could play as that I would really appreciate, particularly since I think Nicolas Cage goes through bouts of just total craziness, and his craziness gets put on camera particularly since he was the executive producer of Spider-Noir. That being said, Spider-Noir got made, and you weren't going to convince Sony to give up the rights to Spider-Man movies or TV. Well, that's interesting. It is a TV streaming series, but I guess they own the rights to that. You weren't going to get them to give up those rights back to Disney ever, and you probably weren't going to convince Sony to make something Spider-Noir without Nicolas Cage almost certainly spearheading the project and putting himself in it. I wish Nicolas Cage had more sanity and would just realize that he's an old actor, which that was, I think, a big part of the problem with that Spider-Man character too, is that he's just really past his prime. But yeah, if he was just the executive producer and you put someone else in the role of playing the Spider-Man, which they just called the Spider, that would have been better. It would have set it up for a potential longer running series instead of just being a mini series. Definitely felt like they were building up that he was going to fight each of the Sinister Six, or one variation of the Sinister Six, considering how every time the Sinister Six got formed in the comics, it was a slightly different variation. But they don't quite get to that. They show 5 characters that have super villain abilities, and then they don't throw in a 6th character, and they only have like 8 episodes, so you would have had to have been dealing with 1 character each, and one of the characters dies in the first episode, which doesn't give them a lot of screen time. Steam Deck Tragedy is still fully in effect, no refurbs available, and yeah, I've seen some people say they're glad they got theirs when it was cheap, because yeah, people certainly aren't happy with the new price tags. And we still haven't gotten any kind of confirmation on the Steam machines. If anything, I think they've kind of pushed back internally their release date of the Steam machines. Yeah, you would think from the original Sinister Six, you have Doc Ock, and you have Kraven the Hunter, or you have the Vulture, or you have Mysterio. None of those 4 characters show up. Instead, you get a Pyro character, an Electric character, a Sandman character, and a character that is seemingly just aging rapidly, which that really only gives you 4 characters. Yeah, I don't know. You could say maybe Man Spider, who is, as far as I know, never part of the Sinister Six, could be a 5th bad guy, because he's shown in a flashback. And then maybe you could say that the Doctor that is in the Spider-Noir is supposed to be one of the bad guys too, as like that's supposed to be Doc Ock, although the Doctor is a female doctor and she does not have octopus arms or anything like that. So maybe they stretched it really far to get to a Sinister Six, but they never got to the point where there was a group of 6 of them in the same room saying they were working together to take down Spider-Man. Overall, I did like Spider-Noir. Let's look at what people are playing on the Steam Deck it is worth, I think, watching for free streaming. Again, I think watching it in color is my suggestion by far. They introduce some characters that they really don't do enough with, and the Nicolas Cage, I think that's his name, I'm pretty sure it is, introduces some silliness in the voice he's doing for the vast majority of the time, which they finally explain that he's basically mimicking the fake noir voice that actors in cinema would do, and that his brain is just like full of spider thoughts, and so he had to rethink how to walk like a human and how to talk like a human, which can kind of explain a lot of it. But then he introduces the idea of when he sleeps, he often just curls up like a spider might on its back, and that just introduces a level of silliness that I don't think Spider Noir benefits from. It's already kind of silly for it to be a noir, so that would be the level of silliness I'd expect it to reach and no further. There is also a point I think that should have been discussed, in that particularly in the later episodes, they really have no problem with characters cussing like you might do in modern times, saying like damn or poop or the S word, or yeah, I don't want to just go on the cussing tirade here in the middle of the stream, but yeah, there's a lot of like choice words, F words, things like that, that would potentially have normal people passing out or starting more fights just for using those words. They're just not like common vernacular things that would have been in that time frame. So they really had a great excuse to say period specific and not have even the bad guys cuss. Because yeah, it's still a Spider-Man thing, but it's definitely not a Spider-Man thing that I think kids would ever want to watch, particularly in black and white. But I also can't recommend it as a Spider-Man for the family because of, well, it's just not really being targeted to the family for the most part, but also because there's nothing for kids there, and there is cussing that feels a little unnecessary. Overall, for an 8-episode miniseries, it doesn't really do that much, and I feel like choreography is probably dead now in Hollywood. That I'm really trying to figure out when is the latest movie where there was any kind of choreographed fight that was of any interest at all. It definitely feels like choreography now is all about just having characters walk past the edge of the screen and get shot so that the bullet impact doesn't show, so that they don't have to have squibs, so they don't have to show any blood, so they don't get an R rating. And a lot of movies now are just gunfights where it's just like hundreds, thousands of bullets are flying, but you never see anybody hit, and you never see an impact on any of it, and it has severely reduced the physicality of fights, which in the case of Nicolas Cage, him putting on the Spider-Man mask pretty obviously is when the stunt double steps in and starts fighting, and even then the stunt double definitely doesn't feel like a Peter Parker Spider-Man jumping around and being agile and swinging through the air with ease. Sure, you don't need every single Spider-Man actor to be a spry 22-year-old, but it makes a lot of sense to err closer to that age than an old man who is not going to realistically be able to do any of the spider actions. Alright, Was there anything else as far as the warm-up today? I do have a mystery 1300 kilowatt hours, or no, 13 kilowatt hours extra that I used yesterday, and all I can think is that maybe my electric dryer is so dirty or so inefficient that it used an extra 10 kilowatt hours over what a normal dryer would use, because a normal electric dryer would be like 3,000 or 3 kilowatt hours to 5 kilowatt hours. But that is a huge jump to do just one load of laundry. And ironically, I have a gas hookup, so I need to really just sell that dryer as soon as I can figure a way to get it out of my garage and replace it with a gas dryer to save on electricity. Yeah, and I think that's as much warm-up as we need to do, so let's go through the Video Games Chronicle articles now. Fable has been delayed to 2027. The Fable reboot will now launch in February of 2027. I don't know if this has more to do with just the state of the economy or state of gaming specifically. I would think not. I think the problem here is Fable still has the Peter Molyneux element stink on it, in that they are just constantly trying to add more content and trying to make the game too big. Yeah. But yeah, I kind of feel like Fable is in this weird position in that you're going to almost have to betray the fans of the original Fable games to make something much closer to a Skyrim game. And as soon as Microsoft owned Skyrim, they should have been doing that. They should have been saying, hey, we're going to have a whole new team. We're going to make something that is very similar to Skyrim, but it's going to be in the Fable universe, and we're going to call that Fable. And it's not going to use the Gamebryo engine that Skyrim uses. It's just going to use Unreal Engine. But what Fable was in the past is unlikely to be anything close to what the Fable reboot is going to be. Because what the Fable games in the past have been are really only going to satisfy the audience that was always too small for Fable. Yeah, this is yet another example of Microsoft probably setting themselves up for a really good success in a smaller period of time, or just failing overall. It is interesting, but we'll never get an answer to know what makes a game get delayed versus what makes a game get canceled. I still wouldn't be surprised if Fable got canceled. But yeah. The whole real estate concept in Fable, which is still a concept that they were promoting, makes no appeal to me at all. I'm just not interested in that idea. The fact that your appearance doesn't change whether you do good or bad things doesn't really affect me that they're taking that out, but that is something that certainly is going to piss off people who like that ability. Otherwise, there are only a couple other things that are kind of uniquely special to Fable, and then the game really should just be kind of like a dungeon crawler, in that you're just going into dungeons like you went into caves in Skyrim and fighting enemies and getting loot, and then returning to the cities and trading the loot for equipment, and just that normal fantasy game cycle really should be what it is. And the thing that always struck me about the Fable games that I did play is the weird storytelling aspect and that you start as a young kid, and then you jump forward, and then you're a young adult, and then some point in the middle of all the Fable games, you tend to get stuck in a jail in a completely different area, and then you have to escape from that jail. And when you escape from that jail, that's when you come back and become king or something like that. Yeah, and I certainly hope they don't just follow that formula again, because that was annoying the times I did experience it. Let's see, the Balatro owner PlayStack has been sold to the parent company of Fandom / GameSpot. PlayStack will be sold for $151 million, subject to shareholder approval. Now, I did play Balatro, and I found it frustrating. I don't know why so many people are saying its praises. I don't know why so many people are singing mixtapes praises, apparently. These days, it does seem like mainstream video game journalism once again has gotten very weird about what they talk about and what they promote. But yeah, I found Balatro just too difficult, and I found its roguelite elements not helpful enough to have an average poker player make it all the way to the highest level of challenges, and had nothing that really would make somebody want to keep on playing Balatro. I didn't find the jokers in the game synergized well enough without knowing some kind of crazy strategy, and there was just too much randomness in the whole thing. So yeah, I stopped playing Balatro. Having said that, my opinion doesn't mean that much. I'm sure it's sold like hotcakes, and with that level of sales, they are selling the company, and that's probably a good idea, because noticeably Balatro didn't come out with any updates or even DLC in what I would think is a reasonable amount of time, which that very well may have changed my opinion on Balatro if they had come out with updates with a whole bunch of new Joker cards that synergized in wilder and crazier ideas. It definitely goes to show, if you're going to make a game like Balatro, your crazy ideas should be kept in your back pocket, as here is an update that really breaks the game balance so more people can actually win. Balatro as it is far too fair of a poker game. So yeah, selling now. In general, it's probably great for PlayStack, but then we have to talk about GameSpot and Fandom. I think these are pretty awful companies, if I'm remembering correctly, and so you can pretty well expect that Balatro will never have a good sequel, and anything else from PlayStack will never have another good sequel or game made from it. Yeah. And I guess I will have to just leave it at that. The good thing that Balatro did really is encouraged a lot of other people to take those general concepts that Balatro introduced and take it into a much further direction. Oh, that reminds me, there was one other thing that happened. I managed with my metal mouse pad to accidentally slide my mouse directly into one of my water mugs. And so I just had a mouse fully immersed in water a couple days ago. So I took it out of the water eventually. Actually carried the mug with the mouse in it, with the water in it, to my bathroom sink. Poured out the water, got the mouse, took out the batteries, took the battery compartment cover off, and then stuck the mouse right in front of my new dehumidifier for 2 days, and flipped the power switch off. And I can attest that that mouse seems to be working perfectly fine now. Now, this was drinking water, so it didn't have much salt in it or anything that would actually conduct, Also, the batteries I have are actually in little plastic covers to adapt AAAs to quad AA's. So that may have helped too. But yeah, just because something falls in water doesn't inherently mean it is ruined. And I got lucky there. Wouldn't have been too big of a problem. I have extra mouses around, so I just used a different mouse. In the meantime, it is kind of hard to use only a keyboard to connect a Logitech mouse, but not that hard. But yeah, that is a good news story, which you get very few of those, or I get very few of those, where things aren't just ruined. Moving on, back to video game news. 007 First Light is already IO's fastest selling game ever. The James Bond title has sold 1.5 million copies in a day. I would argue that the release schedule here is probably pretty great, in that there isn't a James Bond movie out right now, and there hasn't been for a while. So it does kind of make good sense to not compete against yourself there. I have yet to hear anybody actually review the game, but I imagine people are going to sing its praises. Let's see, the Xbox CEO, a new CEO, claims that the Game Pass price cuts are working. Quote, a good first step. They also attempted to explain the rebrand to an all caps Xbox. Here's another example of poorly framed photography. Cutting off the top of the head of the lady and her fingers. All you would have to do was zoom out a little bit more to get all of that. And that's why, generally speaking, you want to zoom out pretty far in your original, because you can always digitally go in and crop things. Also, this is a great example where somebody is taking a photo in landscape mode when clearly they're taking a picture of a person, which should be in portrait mode. So if they just rotated the camera 90 degrees, you wouldn't have run into that problem. It is intriguing design here. We have a zip-up hoodie in green for the new CEO. Not kind of like partially tucked in or bunched up. It looks bunched up, not pulled all the way down. Also, not her size. If you look at the elbows here, they have cinched up these elbows quite a bit. So for some reason they wanted her to wear this, but this doesn't even seem like it's Xbox branded. And then it is zipped down pretty low and is not showing any hint of an undershirt. And then they've got her hair forward and partially back, which is maybe a little messy. This overall just looks really messy. Big toothy smile, looking to the side of the camera, which that's far too much looking to the side of the camera. Getting really bad direction from the photographer. They either hated her or were really bad at their job to say, hey, look at the camera, maybe smile a little less than that, because that is pretty buck teeth. Probably digitally edited bright white teeth, like normally, unless you're getting professional teeth whitening services, they're not going to be that white. But yeah, looking away, this is not a great photo by any means. They've really blurred out the background quite a bit too and put it out of focus. But yeah, not very professional. And maybe it's sexist to say it, but but business has been male dominated for a very long time, and there is a level of expectation that a female CEO should dress up in that kind of power suit and tie type appearance, or at the very least a very professional looking, more female flattering, I don't know, kind of suit, button-up shirt at the very least. I mean, this honestly looks like if you just zip this down, she wasn't wearing anything under it at all. But yeah, even for the CEO of a game company, like, this is not particularly professional. Also, I wouldn't have somebody lean in a photograph either. Stand up tall and strong under your own weight. Don't lean on a table. But yeah, I'm interpreting quite a bit from this photo, but I think there is a lot to be said about how CEOs should think about how they present themselves and how they allow themselves to be presented. Yeah. And it just, in my mind, is feeding a narrative that maybe is only going through the minds of a small percentage of people, that she is basically a weak leader, and in the sense that she's just leading by committee and letting other people really make the decisions, and that she really is a figurehead and a puppet than the actual person making actual decisions. With the general assumption being that it's actually Matt Booty that's running the show for the most part. Alright, moving on. Activision has confirmed Call of Duty Warzone is shutting down on last generation PlayStation and Xboxes. PS4 and Xbox One owners will no longer be able to play after Modern Warfare 4's release. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see a lot of that going on, where Xbox One's PS4 games stop working, or they stop releasing versions for those consoles. We are very much in a potential future where all consoles are going to be extremely expensive, and you're just not going to be able to stay with the last generation of consoles if you want to play any game that has any kind of online capabilities at all. Which PS4 games, Xbox One games, there may not be that many games that would let you just play the single player content, or would even have single player content that would stay supported. Here we have a quote: "No problems to report. Infinity Ward says getting Call of Duty Modern Warfare 4 running on the Switch was pretty smooth." If that's true, I imagine that really is just a case where they have really locked down how easy it is to just reduce the resolution and the special ray tracing lighting effect type stuff down so that it can run in some form on a Switch 2. It is behind the facade all the same hardware now, and I doubt we're ever going to get a new generation of console that tries to run on anything else. Although I suppose there's a small possibility somebody will make a console that runs ARM chips and it just plays cell phone games, but people won't even really consider that a video game console. They'll call it a cell phone console or something different. So yeah, pretty much modern games now have very low settings, and I assume very low settings are exactly what a Switch 2 would be running. And very low settings tend not to look that terrible to a lot of people. and you're still paying $500 to get a Switch 2, so you're paying quite a premium to play some of these games on very low settings. Well, it seems like we're going to get a lot of Modern Warfare announcements. Modern Warfare 4 was announced. This year's Call of Duty is skipping PS4 and coming to Switch 2. It's going to be set in Korea, which explains the symbols here. That is interesting that it's set in Korea because, yeah, we kind of need to watch this reveal trailer just to figure out if they mean Korea during the Korean War or do they mean Korea like now. And it looks like Korea now based on that and the fact that they're saying Modern Warfare. So that seems kind of interesting that you would have a potentially provocation with North Korea, and I assume the United States, even if this Modern Warfare is really the Korean military, South Korean military, which I think maybe that is what they're going to say, is that the entire plotline and story here has nothing to do with the US military. Of course, South Korean military probably is getting some kind of financial assistance or military equipment from the United States. Doesn't really matter that much because it's still a Western company making a story. I can't imagine that the South Koreans are going to even be particularly happy about this story. South Koreans, to my understanding, pretty much have friends and family from many generations back in North Korea and are not itching to engage in any kind of conflict with North Korea. North Korea wants to unify with South Korea, with North Korea being in charge. South Korea wants to unify with North Korea, with South Korea being in charge. Thus they have this awkward stalemate. It's beneficial to mainland China to not have the Koreas unify. So there's no support really happening there. And it would be very difficult for South Korea to accommodate the influx of people from North Korea. It would be very much like the unification of East and West Germany, in that it would be very, very painful financially and economic wise and even socially to merge the now fairly long split two countries into one. Yeah. And that's what's happening in my head, and as far as the trailer shows, it may be that the story has nothing to do with any of that. It does feel kind of weird. I just don't know if Modern Warfare has ever told a story where it isn't the US military going somewhere and doing something. At a certain level, it definitely feels like this could easily just be called something completely different as far as a game goes. So, I guess tune in, because there almost certainly will be some pushback and controversy around this that, if I was to guess, is probably going to die down as soon as people actually play the game and realize that it's just not that interesting. Personally, I think all of the Call of Duties, all the Modern Warfares, all of the military first-person shooter games are dead at this point. You have a rigid audience of people who will continuously play those games no matter what, but there is no growth there, and there is no creativity there as far as them being able to do anything new or interesting. And for my personal opinion, kind of good riddance if all of these military first-person shooters did shrink and if not completely disappear, because they were never very good games for the gaming community as a whole. They sucked in and created a whole different audience of gamer bros and created a large percentage of the controversies around video games. And they did nothing that would push players to play any other kinds of video games. They are, yeah, in a lot of ways like the Marvel movies, maybe perhaps really popular, but also hurting what cinema was overall, because too many things either tried to be Marvel movies or too many other movies weren't getting watched because of the vast majority of Marvel movies. Moving on, Shovel Knight Studios' Make or Break new game has the highest reviews of the year. The platformer Mina the Hollower debuts with huge review scores. Honestly, I think you probably should always promote your game as make or break, because pretty much every single game from every single developer is make or break. But yeah, that probably did get them a few more review scores. But I bet Mina the Hollower actually is a good game too. Let's see. The Pragmata director says, of course, he'd like to make a sequel, but he's not the one who decides. Which, okay. Yeah, that's Capcom, and Capcom probably will make a sequel unless there was something in the story that made it pretty impossible to make a sequel. But even if that was the case, I think you could probably make a prequel or spin-off or something. I feel like if they make a sequel too fast, people may find that the fighting mechanic is a little boring. Too much of that. Capcom would be kind of wise to diversify its releasings, slow down on the Resident Evil games, make some other things in the meantime. It's been a couple weeks since we've heard any news reports about Pragmata, so I think the hype around it is settled down, and people will every now and then find the game and play it, I imagine, but I don't think there'll be a huge resurgence of people talking about Pragmata until a Pragmata 2 is announced. You do run into a slight danger in that it is almost a catch-22 in that Pragmata 1 has the little girl, so either you change nothing because she's a robot and she's still a little girl and she doesn't grow up and learn too much more in the sequel, or you start to age her up, at which point she stops being as cute of a little girl. Which, yeah, they had similar situations with the little sisters and the big daddies in the BioShock series, in that the big sister character they introduced had to be fairly significantly older than the other little sisters who were still little girls. In, I think that was BioShock 2. Yeah, that was BioShock 2. Because that middle step would be weird, certainly. Yeah. I wonder if the more I think about it now, and I won't think about it too much because that'll be too much of a waste of time. I wonder if it wouldn't make a lot of sense in Pragmata 2 to get rid of the older father figure, the human aspect at all, and have Diana be the character you're directly controlling, and then have her create like a little brother or little sister AI character or that still would have like a robot body but would be not a baby but closer to a toddler, and then you could have the role evolve a little bit there. But then maybe you could have it where it's more of a puzzle game and a hacking game and less of a shooting robots game. But then that might be too big of a change too. That's the kind of change I would want to do for my own personal desires, which would probably be stupid because it would be spitting in the face of all the people who actually played and liked Pragmata. And maybe I'll get around to playing Pragmata and actually liking it, like how it plays just fine. It just doesn't seem like in all the trailers I've seen like it's a fun way to control a character, hacking and shooting at the same time. Moving on, Modern Warfare 4 cover leak supports Korea rumors with Switch 2 release reportedly planned. So apparently we're getting these articles backwards, and these there was a leak, they did a live stream, they announced everything. The leak maybe was unintentional, maybe it was intentional. See if I can zoom in here. Well, that's funny. My magnifier didn't want to kick in. Yeah. Take place in South and North Korea was the claim. Alright. See if we search here and see if that symbol on Wikipedia would show up. It's just gonna go through the entire history. Yeah, this is the Korean flag. So I would think that's what we would expect to see, is the Korean flag. So let's go with not the Korean War. Let's see. Military badge. We'll just go straight to images. Yeah. We have quite a few badges here. Yeah, that looks like that's probably the right one there. This badge doesn't look too far from what they were showing. And I imagine a ton of these badges are like not in common use or for older things. Maybe if I tried patch instead of badge, that would be a better descriptor. Yeah, none of these seem to really match. So, yeah. That looks like an eagle to me. That looks like the United States. A United States badge. Which that feels like that is really a bad choice, but whatever. We'll see how much controversy happens when it happens. Donkey Kong 64 is finally coming to the Switch Online's Nintendo 64 library next month. It's the 43rd Nintendo 64 game. I wonder if Nintendo is having to verify the stability of emulating these games on the Switch Online, because that, yeah, Nintendo 64 emulation is still pretty rough. Yeah, it's Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 3. And PlayStation 3 I think is even in worse steps as far as emulation goes. If those hardwares can be emulated, then pretty much everything can be emulated pretty well, and yeah, we'll probably never have problems with emulation past that point. It is worth pointing out that a lot of these games may not actually be that good, and it is just kind of nostalgia. I think Donkey Kong 64 is actually pretty good. Visually, if all of the overlay goes away, man, it does take forever for it to go away. You do have to recognize that there will just be a minimal number of polygons in these character models. Yeah. This is the reason why or at least this is the assumed reason why they canceled and didn't release Star Fox 2, is because they didn't want Star Fox 2 to look really good and then put out these Nintendo 64 games that looked pretty awful. Yeah. It definitely was the case that the Nintendo 64 had to happen, but looking back, it does seem like you could have skipped Nintendo 64 and went straight to GameCube and had a lot prettier graphics. Inherently, 3D models got pushed way too much. And you can basically blame NVIDIA for that. AMD, ATI, well, ATI at the time, not AMD, and NVIDIA, just in this ridiculous war of pushing 3D modeling and 3D graphics, and to a certain level that also led to a lot of really ugly 3D cartoons too. But had it been 10 years later, had there just been a moratorium of we're going to do 2D animations, 2D sprites in games, 2D cartoons, things like that, and had 3D, and the push for 3D had happened 10 years later, it probably would have eliminated the awkward time in which got a really large amount of low polygon ugly things. That being said, it wouldn't have completely eliminated it. We still get low polygon ugly things that are brand new, and they often excuse that and say that they are just evoking the nostalgic look of Nintendo 64 style 3D models, but the reality is they just don't care to put enough effort into it to make better 3D models, or they don't know how to. Oh, I can report, as I'm still every now and then trying to work on my Pokemon slideshow project, that animated GIFs do work in Google Photos, but weirdly either I made the animated GIF wrong or it plays the frames in the wrong order, which would be weird. I probably made the animated GIF wrong, but it does seem like that will work, so that I can have a who's that Pokemon in silhouette, who's that Pokemon revealed, and then a Pokedex entry for that Pokemon, all as individual frames in a single animated GIF file. That way, if you shuffle the entire slideshow, you are not separating the 3 frames from each other. Now I just need to figure out how to do that in an automated fashion with GIMP and try again so that the frames are actually in the right order. And then that will potentially work and solve any issue that I was going to run into, certainly. Yeah. Moving on, Ace Driver, Namco's next polygonal, speaking of polygonal games, arcade racer after Ridge Racer gets its first ever home release this week. So this was an arcade only polygonal thing. Arcade games also certainly bear some blame as to why 3D polygonal games became so prematurely popular, is when you had a arcade machine that potentially had $5,000 worth of computer hardware built into a custom computer CPU hardware. Things could look particularly good, and so you definitely would get a decent looking Cruising USA game in an arcade, and then you would get a very compromised lower polygon Cruising USA game for the Nintendo 64. Yeah, I guess nostalgically I would love for arcades to make more of a comeback. They have pretty well come back at this point. If you're in a big enough city, there's going to be some kind of arcade slash barcade slash amusement center that is going to have a decent number of arcade machines, and depending on their focus, it's either going to be a whole bunch of new arcade machines that are going to be kind of ridiculous and more gambly, like Flappy Bird type games, or you're going to have more of a mix or a full-on old school setup where it's just going to be the same old arcade machines still being maintained and running 30 years later. Which, yeah, that is probably more what I would want, but also it's something I really wouldn't go and visit too often. Yeah. Like it really is the case where my nostalgia for wanting to see an arcade is to see it like once every 6 months at most, or to see it through the eyes of a new generation and take younger kids to an arcade and say, hey, play this game, try this. And that's a little bit fun, but it's not that different from playing the games at home in a lot of instances. Yeah, I don't think we actually need to watch the rest of this rather long trailer. Ace Driver looks like a decent game from the old days. So yeah, I guess in the Wednesday stream, Video Games Chronicle hadn't written up the article yet, but yeah, Valve's Steam Deck gets a huge price increase with the 1TB OLED model now at $949, and that almost certainly establishes that you can expect the Steam machine to be $1,600 or more. Both models have received a price jump of over 40%. Now I will say, I don't think you need the 1TB version of the OLED. I think you are flushing down $150 potentially, just by going with the 1TB model. I know if you can get a refurb 512 OLED, that would be the sweet spot. But even getting a refurb LCD at 512 gigabytes also is very viable. But yeah, it's really expensive, and it's not like you're getting new hardware in it or anything. It has been improved. Yeah, the problem here is Valve, despite all the hype around the Steam Deck, is not Sony, it's not Microsoft, it's not Nintendo, and they have not sold anywhere as many units as Nintendo or Sony or Microsoft has sold. And because they're not selling that many units, and they could not get the price point down low enough to sell that many units, nor do the advertising necessary to sell that many units, they can't buy the components in bulk and outbid Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo for the manufacturing time and the assembly time in factories, and for the raw components to build something like this. The hope that they should have been going for, and that they obviously have failed to have happen, was to get the Steam Deck on the shelf of every Walmart and Target and prominently listed from Valve themselves on Amazon.com and Newegg and several other sites, to really get it on the shelves at a reasonable price point. And that didn't happen. They probably couldn't make enough money. It's a catch-22. They probably couldn't make enough units to get on the shelves of Walmart. They could certainly have been on Amazon.com and chose, I assume, not to be prominently listed on Amazon.com. They probably could have gotten on the shelves of a Kohl's or a Target's. Yeah. But yeah, they needed to have done that when the price was low to sell a lot more units. And they couldn't do that because they didn't have enough units. And now they still don't have enough units, and now the price is high. There is a big assumption here too that this is also just setting the price point of the Steam machine. Although it does create the same problem now. If I recommend people buy the Steam machine, which I still probably will compared to just building a new computer, which a lot of people won't do that and can't do that, it's not going to hit that mass. What Valve needed to be able to do was partner with Microsoft. Probably would have been the only one that could have really partnered with them and released the Steam machine as the next Xbox. And that's unlikely to happen. Or partner with PlayStation and release the Steam machine as the next PlayStation. And that's unlikely to happen too. In a lot of ways, I guess this is echoing much more like the Philips CDI attempt to add yet another console to the market than it is echoing the PlayStation, where Sony had enough money to throw at the PlayStation to eventually compete with the likes of Nintendo, after Nintendo basically stabbed Sony in the back and canceled what was going to be called the Nintendo PlayStation originally, or Microsoft. Like, Valve probably does have enough money that they could have just done what the Xbox 360 did, but I don't think they're willing to spend the money on it. Moving on, Square Enix scraps the original Dragon Quest XII and will now release as Dragon Quest XII Beyond Dreams. The original Dragon Quest XII was announced in 2021. Interesting. I don't know if there's too much to take from that, but I think the general thought is that Dragon Quest games have always been fairly consistently good, and so if they're scrapping something, the original Dragon Quest 12 must have really not been working at all. Of course, the other thought is that Square Enix management is crazy and doesn't know what they're doing, and so they may very well be just interfering once again. While it is not crazy to have a breastplate as a male presenting archer, they tend to not have shadowing and curvature to imply an actual breast for male armor. And let's point out this, that he doesn't have a bow or a quiver with any arrows, so he is wearing a fairly odd outfit for somebody who has a sword as a weapon. Yeah. This kind of armor also kind of odd. But yeah, I'll just point that out and move on, since there's nothing more detailed or in-depth to say there. Moving on to the Gematsu articles. Let's see, Rayman's Origins Enhanced Edition has a Microsoft Store page appear. Interesting. So that game may be coming. Fable has been delayed to February of 2027, no longer due out in the fall. If it's been delayed to February, it's probably also going to be delayed from February to late at the end of 2028, if I was to guess. Oh, it didn't occur to me until just now. There is a possibility that they are straight up delaying this because of the new expansion, is what they're calling it, for Witcher 3. They're calling it an expansion instead of just DLC, because they are claiming it is a significant amount of content that surpasses what a DLC would be considered. Yeah. The visuals of this do definitely feel different than the previous Fable games, and that's for the better, almost certainly. It would have been really hard to maintain the visuals of the previous Fable games and look like a modern game. Let's see, moving on, the Cat in the Hat Rainy Day Mayhem has been announced for the PS4 and 5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. Noticeably, the Xbox One not included, and I think we're going to start to see PS5 exclusives too. The Cat in the Hat, probably not that relevant anymore, despite them, I imagine, wanting it to still stay relevant. The whole Dr. Seuss series of books is probably staying relevant because the books are being pushed in like Scholastic book fairs. Which, yeah, now looking back and thinking about Scholastic in particular, is definitely running a should be illegal company shop in those Scholastic book fairs, and that they're promoting only things that they publish themselves. Whereas if you really were to look at the books that people on like Amazon were buying for kids in the category of children's literature, I imagine you'd see a lot fewer game books that you'd recognize, and books that would be from older publishers who are just promoting themselves like crazy. We've had a string of fairly old, like Cat in the Hat, probably 40 years old, maybe 30 years old. But yeah, we've seen games based on these old properties show up fairly recently in the past couple of years, and it does seem like there's not really a good reason for them to show up, that they are very late to the party, having video game versions of their concepts. It would have made a lot more sense if they'd come out like in the 90s. Moving on, Inazuma 11 Cross launches June 9th in Japan. It's a free-to-play mobile game. Inazuma 11 still seems to be fairly popular, although I don't know if the anime actually is airing or if it is just already come and gone. Let's see, Inazuma 11 Victory Road's 5th free major update, new kickoff DLC, launches June 11th. I don't know why the thumbnails here are so blurry, but they are. Here we can see Inazuma 11 Victory Road is very positive for fans of either anime or soccer, or anime soccer combined. Wuthering Waves version 3.4 update, The Dream Not Dreamed, launches June 8th. It's a Cyberpunk collaboration update. Wuthering Waves is single player with in-app purchases, which is interesting. Story-rich open world RPG. High degree of freedom is how they're describing it. Yeah. It's a free-to-play game, though, and I guess that's why it's not on my wish list. It's just kind of don't see a reason to even have in my library a free-to-play game where it's probably a little free to start, and then you have to buy microtransactions to keep on going, or you have to grind out like crazy. I'm already doing that. Oh yeah, and we skipped the mobile games today again. I wonder what's going on with that. Yeah, I'm already doing that though with Pokemon TCG Pocket, which does have its new expansion. The new expansion introduces the Pokemon that were turned into motorcycles, and some of the cards have like ancient in the corner of their art, and some of them have future, just the word ancient, the word future in the corner. I don't know if that actually has any play effect or not, but yeah, it does seem like they've added yet another level of complexity to these new Pokemon in the Pokemon TCG Pocket. And yeah, I'm playing Memento Mori, and they've introduced a new character and a new event, which is just a rehashing of an old event yet again. Although Memento Mori is going to stream on their Japanese channel I assume it's going to be live action singers singing the songs from Memento Mori, Japanese presenters, I assume, as a concert, which that might be interesting for me to sit through if I have nothing better to do. Like hearing the songs sung live. Yeah, there's a rumor that Rayman Legends Retold is going to be announced on June 2nd. There's an update to this rumor talking about the Microsoft Store page surfacing. Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, Endless Ragnarok, Meet the Crew, Fox trailer is available. Yeah, again, I have no idea why the thumbnails from YouTube would be so blurry. I don't think that's anything of my doing, but I don't know. My network has been having somewhat trouble. When I was watching Spider Noir on Prime Video, it was desyncing quite a bit, and I had to exit out and start over the stream a couple times, which I really shouldn't be doing that. A game called Viractal is coming to the Switch 1 and 2 on September 30th. Switch 2 version will be available physically in Japan. I assume everything else is digital then. This is a totally new to me game. Looks like it has cards and dice. And that's pretty much, I think, all I can say about it. Well, it is rated very positively on Steam and does have enough user reviews. It's from January 2026, so we'll do that. Put it on the wish list. See, Cave Interactive's Shoot 'em Up bundle, Moochie Moochie Pork and Pink Sweets Boosted has been announced for PS5, Switch, and PC, and that definitely is a mouthful as far as a title. It definitely seems like you've got at least 1, 2, 3, 4 different art styles here of different, I don't even know if you'd call these anime girls for that art style. It's just not as bright and colorful as the others. A lot of these have a tendency to have quite a lot of cleavage showing. So I'd assume this is just multiple shoot 'em up games. Let's see. With Peggy 12. Yeah. That there is just a publisher who has several shoot 'em up games that are either brand new or possibly actually rather old. Pink Sweets apparently is something. Moochie Moochie Pork is something else. So it seems to me like there's actually 2 games being bundled. It really goes to show that there was a point there where game developers in Japan only knew or only could get approved to make shoot 'em up games, but also knew that the audience was into anime girls or anime cat girls in this group, and so they have merged 2 fairly separate concepts together to try and make a game. And in this case, they merged the same concept together twice to make 2 games. And now the shoot 'em up games really are of so little value even to the Japanese audience that they have to bundle them together just to sell them, resell them. A Japanese-inspired sci-fi fantasy RPG called Gravistar has been announced for modern consoles and PC. Now it's my text rewriting that is rewriting modern consoles, but I would assume that is PS5, Xbox Series, and Switch 2 at this point. Which I could also turn that off just to see, but I'm not even going to bother with it. Yeah. It would be nice if there was some kind of picture you could put in there instead of a text to represent PlayStation and Xbox Series and Switch 2, but there isn't emojis for those types of things. Here we can see this bundle of shoot 'em up games is available on Steam too. I want to put this on the follows just to see if anybody would actually respond to it. I doubt they would. So, and that's not an Eastern only thing. Like, there is plenty of movies that were in movie rental stores back in the day. Not perhaps blockbusters, but certainly in other movie rental stores where movies were garbage and they would just put an attractive lady, usually not an animated lady, but an attractive lady nonetheless, on the cover to get people to rent the movie or buy the movie. Let's see. Moving on, Iron Wing Valiant, record of Asteria's second closed alpha test has been announced. That's a mouthful. A Dwarven tactical RPG called Runesmith has been announced for PC. My images here not loading up correctly. Interesting. Alright, well that will take us to the Steam front page. We don't have too much going on, and honestly we won't have too much going on for, I think, a while. Generally I'm expecting there won't be any big sales until the fall sale. And I do think I probably am not going to get any Dragon Quest games, and I probably am not going to get that library game. It does feel like at this point maybe they should just take the Steam Deck sale page off, but then they also just don't want the Steam sales numbers to go down. Yeah, here's that librarian game I was talking about. Probably was a little bit more painful than it would seem for Valve to raise the prices, because they pretty much know that their sales numbers are going to drop, and they really probably want the number of units to stay increasing, not decreasing. Although maybe then the sales numbers aren't dropping that much, because as far as top sellers, the Steam Deck is still making it into this chart, although maybe they are artificially pinning this to be the Steam Deck to be in the chart. There has also been a long period of time in which it's been impossible to buy the Steam Deck from Valve's storefront at all, refurbished or in new states. Right. So there's a Cerebral puzzle showcase, which I believe Cracking the Cryptic was asked to live stream during this. So we'll look at the streams in a second. Some of these games, like Steven Sausage Roll, has always been way too expensive. Like 50% off and it's still $15. While I think it is an overwhelmingly positive game, visually, it definitely doesn't look like it is a $15 game. Of course, I want to be somewhat careful here and not jump into playing puzzle games that would take forever. You've got these like 50% off bundles, which I guess you have to be kind of careful too on the pricing, because if anybody's going to be smart enough to do the math, it's going to be people who like puzzle games. Yeah, thought that was on the wish list. Called to see. Map, a game about maps. Haven't seen that one. But yeah, you can pretty well tell that most of these games did not escape my vision, and I am a decent fan of puzzle games, or games that at the very least have puzzly, large amounts of puzzle elements. Apparently there's a push to add an OS tag or fake OS tag. Of course, Steam just added some tags and did not add fake OS. I also want to be kind of careful around anything that's more too wordy or too thinky. That's one thing that Blueprints probably established for me too, is that I don't really want to play a game that's going to push me beyond my limits of intelligence, which, yeah, Blueprints had too many puzzles on top of puzzles on top of puzzles for my taste. And at a certain point, if I can't figure it out in what I feel like is a reasonable amount of time, I am just going to look up the answers online. And if there aren't answers online, I'm just going to be frustrated. Then some of these puzzle games, like the Sexy Brutale, while there is a puzzle element to it, it's not anywhere as deep as I might have wanted it to be. And I do wonder if something like this or this would be more my style than Blueprints. That being said, I really don't want to buy something discounted. This is the game made from a YouTuber called Game Maker's Toolkit, so I'm familiar with that. Haven't played it, but it is one. Kind of dismissed that game for being kind of a Tetrisy packing game. But yeah, you're seeing that there's a lot here. And take note that what you're not seeing is any game. These are all co-op games. Yeah, you're not seeing anything here that is just your generic Sudokus. This is probably the closest one to a generic math, pencil and paper type puzzle game that video games have very much jumped past that point. So Thingy Direct is a bunch of trailers, I think, for games coming out. This Rydo game caught my attention. Cracking the Cryptic played this. The idea of you find letters and then you solve simple jigsaw puzzles, or not jigsaw puzzles, crossword puzzles, to then move forward. And then there's some other kinds of puzzles, pen and paper puzzles too. Escape Academy, red frame. Looks like it's a photography game. That is one of the things that's great about puzzle games, is that there is going to be a long list of people planning on making them. And I definitely do think that puzzle games should become more popular because of the balancing factor of just so many other games being first-person shooters as their main game mechanic to start with. And while there are, I imagine, a decent number of people that are not willing to do puzzle games, there's a lot more people who aren't willing to do horror games, for example, to contrast. So yeah. And then, of course, there's dozens upon dozens of other genres in the middle there where people should probably play a little bit more of those types of games. So yeah, the schedule here starts with a Thinky Direct and then Thinky Games, and then it scrolls through what I suspect are a bunch of other YouTubers that I don't recognize. And then on Sunday, the 31st, Cracking the Cryptic, which is this guy and this guy, are going to be doing their Blueprints stream, which I assume is going to be their continuation of their Blueprints stream and not a separate new Blueprints stream. Although, in all fairness, it wouldn't be terrible if they did make a separate Blueprint stream from the beginning to just show how to get from the beginning of the game to the Room 46 first act ending. This is one of those rare examples also where my vertical streaming format is squishing this picture in a lot more than you would normally see it if you had a standard 16:9 widescreen image. So math is not my biggest strong suit. I don't think that's exactly what this is, but I'll give it a follow and give it a chance. Lost Twin says it's single player. Play solo or with a friend. It probably is a worse experience if you play solo, but it's playable solo. Probably should look for Lost Twins 1. Before I would play Lost Twins 2. Now it's funny, there's a bundle here for everything except for Lost Twins 1. Yeah, there is no Lost Twins 1 on that category. So that makes me wonder if Lost Twins 1 was perhaps a Switch game or something like that. This one is mixed in the last 30 days and requires co-op. That's why it's not on my list. This one also requires co-op. I do kind of like the different art style for a puzzle game, although it does have this kind of weirdly sinister feel to it, which I don't think puzzle games and scary stuff really should merge together too often. One Move Away we do have on the follow list already. Puzzle Spy International seems to be a kind of heavy text-based one. Is rated very positively, but I would have to be cautious on whether I could make good content from something or something like this, or if I could even make it all the way through. Increasingly, Cracking the Cryptic is pushing me to do more puzzle type experiments instead of just Sudokus. They are also doing cryptic conundrums, I think is what they are called, or just cryptics. And yeah, I'm starting to slowly learn how to solve a cryptic clue, and it is incredibly cryptic, following logic that you really just have to have someone else explain to you before you can figure it out yourself. House of Tesla. It's probably just mostly a hidden object game, but it doesn't look terrible as a hidden object game. So I'll put that on the wish list. Mine Diver. That definitely seems different. This was from September of 2025. This does feel like fictional language puzzle game. Might be short enough that it's easy enough to do. I probably would prefer games to be short if they are going to introduce the idea of fictional languages, so you don't just get overwhelmed with having to learn a language and then also you're in a giant game and you have to use that language in solving several other puzzles, which is kind of exactly what happens in Blueprints. Yeah. I don't know so much about that one. Yeah. I don't know how many puzzle games I really should be playing. I do, in the past, have more of a leaning towards... Yeah, this looks pretty difficult. I'll have to think about that one. I have a leaning towards more action puzzling, more platforming puzzling, and less of the straight up just pencil and paper puzzling. And a lot of these are leaning closer to the pencil and paper puzzling. But we are finding new things to consider, at least, which the majority of these sales tend not to really do that. So yeah, I think this more logistics map making puzzling concept might work really nicely. And it certainly has a nice 3D visual style to it. Call of the Sea. It's already on my wish list. And then here's a non-puzzle game, Mina the Hollower, which we'll put on the wish list since it's positively reviewed. I still haven't fixed my fall list cleanup. And then the James Bond game we'll also put on the wish list. Now, wait a minute. Didn't we just look at like the front page of Steam? And weren't we seeing that in the middle of the Gematsu articles? Yes, we were. So it definitely does seem like my stuff is all over the place. So, knowing that all my tabs are out of order, won't change too much, but it does give me a moment of time to reflect, and then that moment I think it is time to take a break. So I'll be back in a few minutes. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I actually looked at the Yu-Gi-Oh card decoder in the middle of that break, which, yeah, it's a guessing game where you have 8,000 plus cards and you're either using hints or guessing to try and figure out which one of those 8,000 plus cards they're thinking of, with a limited number of guesses and a limited number of hints. I imagine you would have to get fairly lucky to be able to guess all 7 cards in a day, which I assume you get 7 different guesses in a day, or maybe that thing has only been going on for 7 days. It is kind of educational, I suppose, to learn the incredibly complicated filtering system that the search has to have for having 8,000 plus cards. Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel has even more than 8,000. 8,000 I think is just the cards that are considered actually viable amongst it. And it still is very much the case that Yu-Gi-Oh! As a everything, as a genre, as a card game, is in a stasis as the creator died tragically trying to save other people who were drowning, and the Konami just doesn't have anybody else, I think, who can step up and do something with the series, either as an anime or as a card game. I won't engage with the card decoder any further because I've long since stopped playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, but it is an interesting addition for a game that's been around for 3 years now as far as Master Duel, and is probably going to have to stay around for a lot longer than that. Which it really doesn't make a lot of sense for them to come out with a new Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game, but they almost certainly will. Anyways, let's get back to the video game news. From Gamatsu, Anima Song from the Abyss launches in 2027. Oh yeah, I also saw during the break, Intel has just announced 2 new specifically for handheld chips for handheld gaming, which, yeah, we do, I think, want to see a third party competing, and Intel is that third party at the moment. Probably would like a fourth party competing for chips just to keep CPUs and GPUs cheap and competitive. But I wouldn't really suspect that the Intel chips are going to be the beginning of something huge or new. But it almost certainly will be an incremental improvement on the lower end mobile gaming devices, by which I mean the cheap $60 things you might get on AliExpress, not the Switch 1 or the Switch 2. So real gaming, non-emulation, non-cell phone gaming, still probably isn't going to be touched by these new Intel chips, or if they are touched by them, it is going to be questionable performance, I suspect. That being said, Intel might actually have a history of better battery management, so if it came down to the next Steam Deck actually having an Intel chip instead of an AMD chip, and then the battery life was even better, that would be interesting. But almost certainly that wouldn't be what they were even building to. They are almost certainly building for more performance with the same amount of battery life. It's not like the Steam Deck has bad battery life. Even limiting my battery to only charge up to 80%, it still takes 8 hours before my Steam Deck tends to run down close to 0. And since I'm playing in bed usually, I can just plug it in very easily at that point. Moving on, the survival horror RPG Thermocline has been announced for all consoles and PC. Interesting. Different type of art style it looks like too. Crystal Project 2 has been announced for PC. Explore a seamless open world and search for keys to unlock your dreams. Hmm. Well, I was not expecting 8-bit sprites there as visuals. Though I wasn't expecting 8-bit sprites for thermocline either. So maybe I should just expect that more often. Yeah, this definitely has that kind of Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3 type vibe to it visually. Infinite Alliance adds Crosscode, Seed of Nostalgia, and Cosmic Star Heroine characters. It is a crossover turn-based RPG featuring characters from independent Japanese style RPGs. Maybe not actually from Japan, or maybe none of them are actually from Japan. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense to have your RPG crossover. You're already doing a ton of world building in an RPG game usually anyways, to kind of betray that world building and have your characters show up in a crossover game feels a little awkward. Yeah, sure, people didn't mind if the Final Fantasy characters were in Smash Brothers, but yeah, if all of a sudden Final Fantasy characters were showing up in Dragon Quest games, I think people would be fairly upset, even if there was a middle game in which both of those characters were in the same world. I don't know if there's a lot of tribalism amongst RPG game fans, though. There may not be that much, so they may be cool with it. Emery Hearts launches September 2nd. Yeah. Apparently that is another RPG game. So it looks like we've got a publisher that is announcing several RPG games at the same time, which is perhaps a mistake, because I think every RPG game probably deserves its own separate announcement. Edges of Memories demo is launching June 15th for PC. You can play the first chapter. This is an interesting split in that you have fantasy lady with fantasy armor, then kind of tattered armor, then eventually going straight to a wooden hand with claws and spikes. And the background definitely showing devastation on this side and growth on this side. Infinite Alliance is a game I saw on June 4th and totally dismissed, and am still dismissing it, even though it says it's going to be a free game. So really it's a bit of cross promotion of these different games, possibly from the same publishing group, or possibly just a coalition of willing RPG people. I can't help but feel like this might just be the echoes of RPG Maker once again, though, and that these may all be RPG Maker games and sprites that just are easily copied and pasted into Infinite Alliance. Here we can see Edge of Memories. Definitely does seem like your main protagonist there is gonna end up turning into some kind of monster. Hollow Knight Silksong Physical Edition has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and Switch 2. Okay. A story-driven Japanese-inspired RPG called Full Circle has been announced for consoles and PC. Increasingly, we're having things described as Japanese-inspired, which definitely makes me think this is companies just jumping on a bandwagon to use that as a branding thing. And I suppose it's probably accurate to say they might be Japanese RPG inspired more than they're Japanese inspired. Because, yeah, Japanese RPGs and then Japanese people are very different things. 007 First Light sales top 1.5 million in 24 hours. You'd probably make a pretty boring game if you were inspired by Japanese people of modern time. It would be an RPG game where they're just going to work or school and toiling their lives away. Even if you were like feudal era Japanese inspired, you would have to make them a special character, a samurai or an emperor. Otherwise they would just be farmers, farming more likely than anything else. Yep, haven't gotten around to buying Hollow Knight, let alone Hollow Knight 6 Silk Song. Probably won't get around to buying it anytime soon, considering how everybody's probably already heard of that game. The Witch's Bakery launches in August. The Secret World of Yeti composer Cecil Corbel is going to score the main theme. So yeah, they're trying to create a connection there. Which, yeah, I don't think it's too terrible to try and make that kind of connection. This does have a Ghibli-esque kind of feel to it, although the art style feels way worse and off. And the Secret World of Ariadne technically was put out by Ghibli. But I don't think it was one of their bigger animes. Ova Magica is now available for PC. It's coming to the PS4 and 5, Xbox One and Series and Switch on July 21st. These are, I guess, egg-shaped creatures. I randomly came across the fact that they have literally invented a toilet for cows. It is quite the mechanical contraption, and they are collecting urine in particular to turn it into nitrogen for fertilizer from the cows, probably saving them some money that way, as nitrogen is very difficult to break down and get in its normal forms at the scale that farmers need it. The toilet looks more like an upside down turtle shell than a toilet does, though. Moving off that topic quickly, Frog Squad launches June 11th. Looks like one of those multiplayer friends games. Yeah, I don't know why I specifically even have that on the follow list. I'll take that off since it is online co-op only. Let's see, Moomin Troll Winter's Warmth is coming to the PS5 alongside physical editions. Decent amount of news today. This game is overwhelmingly positive, so we can go ahead and put it on the wish list. It almost feels like as long as something gets a second news article about it or gets released to a second console, I will catch the games on the fall list that are really successful. But there is still a huge percentage of games that are just being left on the fall list and then no updates are ever posted, nor am I going back to check on a game that's been out for years and has nobody's ever played it or reviewed it. Moving on, NBA The Run open beta test is set for May 30th. PopUcom version 1.2 update is now available. It adds a new story mode stage and mini games. I don't recognize this game. This one's not out yet. I saw it, but I didn't put it on the fall list because it was multiplayer. And now it says there's a story mode, but I think the story mode update is also still going to be multiplayer. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 4 announced for modern consoles and PC. We already talked about that. It is interesting there's no follow button here. Oh. Yeah, I have no idea why the follow button is missing, but it is. Corsair Cove launches July 31st. The demo is now available. It would be interesting if the follow button disappeared once you had like 5,000 games followed. But I'd prefer it to really explain that and just not have the button disappear. It would be just as easy to have it say full. Retro Sports Roguelike first-person shooter Sportal launches June 11th for the PS4 and 5, Xbox One and Series, Switch and PC. That looks like a kind of weird game. Yeah, I don't know if that's going to be my type of game, but I'll give it a chance. BeamNG.Drive is coming to the PS5 in 2026, and the early access version 0.39 update has been detailed. Which, yeah, with a number that low, that sounds like it is very much in beta. It is overwhelmingly positive as a racing game. Soft body physics simulator. Maybe not a racing game at all. Still in early access since 2015 though. Yeah, I don't know what to really say about something like this. It's been in early access for 11 years. Seems like their definition of early access is probably wrong. Yeah. I'm gonna leave that at that point, I guess. Roller Coaster Tycoon Classic is now available for the Switch 2, PS4, and Xbox One. $5 upgrade from the Switch version. Yeah, you can see it's rated very positively on Steam. Planet Zoo 2 has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC, due out October 13th. The Famitsu sales from the 18th to the 24th have been updated. Tamagotchi Life taking the #1 spot with Yoshi. Number 2, Pokepia, number 3. Mario Kart World, number 4. When do we see our first PlayStation game, Pragmata, for PS5? In number 11 spot. And then, when's the next PlayStation? Well, this is shocking. Xbox Series X Forza Horizon 6 has sold well enough in Japan to make it to the 26th spot. Which this may be the first time we've ever seen an Xbox Series X game in the top 30 sales of Japan ever. That is perhaps speaking to the power of making a racing game set in Japan. The Japanese audience seemingly somewhat curious about that. And I guess the question is, how did people buy the Xbox Series X to play those games? The numbers there don't particularly add up too much. Because if you combined the total of the Series X and the Series X Digital Edition, which if you got the Digital Edition you wouldn't be able to buy Forza Horizon 6, I don't think, you still aren't hitting anywhere close to the number of units that's sold. So it almost feels like the Japanese bought this game thinking they could play it on a PlayStation, or already owning an Xbox Series X, which seems unlikely, or holding it on their shelves. Yeah, I don't get it any other way. You would definitely have expected that there would have been at least 1,401 Xboxes sold. Xbox Series X's in particular. Because digital editions wouldn't be able to play it. Series S maybe would be able to play it. Still combined, you're talking only 400 units. Interesting. I wish Famitsu would sometimes delve deeper into figuring out how that happened. Moving on, Escape the Backrooms for PS5 and Xbox Series is now available. I would have assumed there was already several Backrooms style games on those consoles. I don't know if this is specifically connected to the Backrooms movie that I think is coming out pretty soon. Yeah, and I definitely saw a description of the... I'm going to take this off because I'm never going to play this kind of game. It was kind of a description of where the Backrooms as a concept came from, and I'm pretty sure it came from SCP, or at least was heavily inspired by the website, the collaborative effort of SCP, which this would make the second time that something has commercialized and stolen the general concepts of SCP and not really credited it much. Control, for instance, is obviously directly inspired by SCP. Although I don't know how you really do credit a collaborative open source effort of random people writing random stories and trying to merge it all into one canonical universe. Let's see, Wall Worlds 2 is now available for PS5 and Switch. It's been currently available for PC. But yeah, the trailer of this game and what this game actually is, I think, was fairly different in that it seems like you are connecting to the side of the wall quite a bit and doing mining more than anything else. Is really just taking the concept of a mining game and turning it 90 degrees, which maybe makes things a little bit more interesting, but not that much more interesting. You can see it's mixed in the last 30 days, 75% overall. I don't think it's the kind of game I'd want to play. Dice Gambit is coming to the PS4 and PS5 and Switch in Q2 of 2026. This is a unique art style. It kind of feels like the art style you might have seen in some of those MTV animations. Yeah, I'm thinking similar somewhat to Aeon Flux, but not quite there. And yeah, some of those MTV animations in particular really should have led to more animators getting more of a chance and different animation styles to be created. Unfortunately, it really didn't happen that way, and Aeon Flux stood out as its own thing, and any of the other animations that was similar to that pretty much got forgotten. it definitely goes to show how you can make your game stand out by being a true artist and having a different kind of artistic style and not just being a copier who is tracing and copying. I don't know why this wasn't on the follow list. I'm going to go ahead and just put this on the wish list since it's rated very positively. Let's see. Kyoto Xanadu character trailer Rui is available if you want to check that out. River City Saga Journey to the West official trailer is also out on Gamatsu if you want to check that out. I'll put this on the follow list. Classic Horror Adventure Games Bundle Gakko de Ata Hawaii Hanashi and Tsukikomori have been announced for Switch. Those are, I assume, 2 different games. Yeah, from these kinds of silhouette shadows, that tells me very little about them. Nintendo 64 Classics adds Donkey Kong 64 on June 3rd. Shonen Run and Gun game Tiebreakers has been announced for PC. It's funny, it's being called a Shonen Run and Gun game, and then they're showing us basketball and tennis. That's not what I would have expected that game to be about. Again, kind of a different art style. It's a more common art style, but not that common. So yeah, you're just running and gunning and beating up people. I would assume this was a beat 'em up game, would be the way to describe it. And we're finally getting close to the end of the Gamatsu articles. Dear and Boy launches June. This is, again, a very different art style. I'm not 100% sure what this would be. I would assume it's a platform or puzzler game. And then the Steam Deck OLED price increase was announced. $240 increase for the 512 gigabyte model, and then a $300 increase for the 1 terabyte model. I guess if you run those numbers, then that is telling you that they're charging you $60 for 512 gigabytes, and then there is just a $240 increase in all the other components due to economic times. The stupid economic times we live within. Which, for most people at this point, you've spent more time of your life in bad economic times than you've been in good economic times. And even if you were living in good economic times, you were definitely not encouraged to save for the bad days. And it may not have really helped you even if you had saved. But yeah, $60 does feel about right for 512 gigabytes when being bought in bulk. The $240 doesn't make a lot of sense. It's basically saying that every single component on average is 50% more expensive, which maybe it is. That brings us to Gaming on Linux articles. The owner of Fandom and GameSpot wants to acquire the Balatro publisher PlayStack. Deal isn't done yet. Obviously, it needs shareholder approval, but usually shareholders do approve those kinds of things. And we'll see how terrible that ends up being for PlayStack. I don't imagine it's going to lead to good things. There's that game Over Magic. Yeah, I don't think this is the kind of game I'd really want to play. I don't see myself getting into farming sims anytime soon. You know what, I'll just put it on the wish list and then realize I probably will never buy it. You can get lots of great games across multiple recent Humble Bundles, which means likely all of these games are going to be opened up in the next tabs. Dusklight, the re-implementation of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, gets a major update. It was originally called Dusk. It's an open source re-implementation of Twilight Princess. To avoid confusion with the first-person shooter game called Dusk. Let's see. They've added modern depth of field improvements, a data folder configuration for Android, ARM64 and Linux builds. The number pad enter now works in menus, which that seems weird. That wouldn't have worked. You do get into fairly weirdness here as a content creator in that these kinds of open source re-implementations still rely on grabbing the textures from Nintendo, and honestly, even if you had texture packs that were wholly created from an artist that looked completely different from the Nintendo textures, the way the entirety of the game is designed to operate and feel like Twilight Princess still puts it in the area of copyright infringement. So there really is just not a great way in which you could say, hey, go and install this and do that and do 20 more steps so that you can play Twilight Princess on your computer and then watch me play Twilight Princess on my computer. What you get with a re-implementation versus emulation is that new features can be added, mods can be added, things of such sort. But such as Link there looking like a girl, which I don't think was in the original game. But there is, again, I don't think ever going to be a huge effort to try and take something that plays like Twilight Princess and improve upon it and change it in such a drastic way that it is more like you are sampling Twilight Princess versus recreating and replacing Twilight Princess. You know, it seems like the game has achievements added to it too. And yeah, you might have a little bit more copyright protection. Let's face it, Nintendo doesn't really care about fair use defense and will sue you no matter what. But if you sampled multiple Zelda games and took general concepts of Zelda-like games and made your own thing, that might work. So if you took like one dungeon from Twilight Princess, one from Ocarina of Time, one from Link to the Past, and mixed them all together, that would feel a lot like a randomizer, but if you visually made them all mixed together, that might work. But by the time you're doing something like that, you might as well just make a Zelda-inspired game, and I'd love to see more people make Zelda-inspired games, because with the exception of Darksiders, I just don't have any example of something that really feels like a 3D Zelda-inspired game to ever come out from any other company. And there aren't even that many 2D Zelda inspired games on Steam. There's a few, but not anywhere as many as you would expect there to be, or I would expect there to be. Maybe it's a case that Zelda is really just not as popular. And then when you get into Breath of the Wild, there's a lot of games that Breath of the Wild very much was inspired by, so running around generic open worlds can describe a lot of games. Moving on, pilot a customizable hovercraft in SCAD, the post-apocalyptic roguelike Bullet Heaven. Okay. Suppose a hovercraft might work fairly well in a zombie apocalypse. But then running over the zombies and hurting them in a hovercraft seems less believable. I would think the reason why you would use a hovercraft is that you're going to just gently lift yourself over and run over zombie corpses so you don't get stuck on them. Logically, it's a great way to have hundreds of zombies, thousands of zombies all attack you at once and just run over them. Feels reminiscent of an old 90s game I vaguely recall playing on PC, where you're just controlling a vehicle very awkwardly because, yeah, the car controls tended to be pretty awful in the old days. Yeah, seems like there's something here. This guy, I assume it's a guy, he is really bandaged up. Yep. Yeah, I suppose if you had like a bomber plane and enough bombs, or a helicopter, or anything with enough guns, you could probably take out zombies pretty easily from the air. Yeah, that's a thought. Zombie movie makers need to think of how do you take out the airplanes from the ground, or how do you guarantee that there are no airplanes that can leave the ground. Let's see, Planet Zoo 2 has been announced to release in October with a deep conservation focus. Alright. That makes a lot of sense. There has been a decent rise of Reddit posts around animals and just happy images around animals more than just dogs and cats. So yeah, I think people are more interested in animals than they might have been, say, 10 years ago. Let's see, FlatHub has moved to ban nearly all apps and submissions made with generative AI. FlatHub is one of the most popular ways to grab applications on Linux. I think it is what is used in the desktop mode of the Discovery app by default on SteamOS. You could probably add other repositories other than FlatHub, but I can't name a single Flatpak repository other than FlatHub. So basically, they're saying no AI generated anything. AI is not allowed to be used for the submission process and applications being submitted. Which, yeah, this highlights the problem with AI. AI is just flooding everybody's workloads, everything on the internet, with extra work. Search engines are getting worse because of AI. It is a cancer that is spreading and creating nonsense that nobody wants. Let's see. Applications also that are containing copyrighted, license incompatible, or ethically questionable code are also not allowed. These submissions can be rejected without any further review. Repeated violating these processes may result in a permanent ban from future submissions and activities. Exceptions may be granted for mature, well-maintained projects. And in this case, I imagine mature does not mean adult content, and it just means that it's an established project that they respect. Let's see. Epic Games CEO Tim Sweeney throws shade at Valve/Gabe Newell for the Steam Deck pricing. Well, Tim Sweeney is not offering us any other kind of Steam Deck competitor, which noticeably, they could have done that, certainly. They could have taken some of their Fortnite money, maybe a lot of their Fortnite money, and tried to make a mobile device that would have played Fortnite, so that then it wouldn't just be trying to get on the iPhones and Apple Play stores, and would have competed with the Steam. Well, it's funny, they're saying he's throwing shade, but I'm not, it's going over my head. Someone else posted, this might be the biggest Valve L in years, and then his response, I'm not reading the rest of the post there. Everyone's being too harsh. There's been a significant rise in the cost of components that Steam customer spending ultimately funds, and economic trends have created a severe disruptions in the component parts supply chains for mega yachts. It's the last word. That is the shade there. Which, yeah, easy to throw out shade and words. Harder for Epic as a company to actually come out with their an actual competitor. Which honestly, an actual competitor to the Steam Deck would be very interesting from Epic, because then they could also push and promote Unreal Engine running very well on their competitor Steam Deck, which would be very interesting if they started focusing on that. Right now, Steam Deck still really doesn't have an audience competitor. You can get an ROG Ally X, but not enough people are using that for you to have a good time with the software there. And there's some other handhelds with that same problem. And even if you get an ROG Ally X and take the Windows out of it and install Bakelite or something on it, your performance still is likely not to be as smooth of an experience as SteamOS did. At the very least, Epic could have tried to make their own operating system to install on the Steam Deck, which it is interesting nobody has tried that either, because, yeah, Microsoft Windows arguably should try to get Windows running on the Steam Deck and say, hey, performance is actually even better on a Steam Deck when you install Windows. Let's see, moving on, you can now dim the Steam controller LED plus some other Steam changes in the fresh beta. Valve continuously iterating on its client and operating system way more than anybody else is. Yeah. Dimming the light on the Steam controller is also a welcome thing. Generally, anything that has a light on it probably doesn't need a light in the first place, but if it is going to have a light on it, I would like to be able to turn it off or to at least adjust the brightness. There still is a huge number of devices that light up kind of for no reason, or I'd like to at the very least have them not light up. Very often it is just put some black tape over it, buy some blackout stickers and put it over it. Despite the significant price increase, the Steam Deck is already sold out in certain regions, so this may very well be the case that they are not really planning on having that much in stock in the first place. And so they are just getting the maximum profit that they can get from the small inventory that they have. Which in fairness, that economically makes sense. It's not great for the consumer by any means, but if you only have 10 units, you might as well sell those 10 units at $1,000 instead of $500, because you're still only going to have 10 units if they actually sell at that price tag, and obviously in this case they did sell at that price tag. Alright, these are the new Intel processors I believe I just heard about. Intel Arc G series processors have been announced for next generation handheld PCs. I think some of these are just based off of old things or older technologies. Intel Core Ultra Series 3, Panther Lake being the code name. Then an integration of Intel Arc B390 graphics, or up to that, on Intel's latest Xe3 architecture. So yeah, it doesn't really strike me as these being guaranteed to be much faster than what we already have. I think they are really just jumping into the fight and going to make something that is okay but not great. It might be cheaper too, and a lot of this is potentially just getting like Wi-Fi 7 revision 2, which I've never heard of that, and dual Bluetooth 6. Intel Thunderbolt support, still not something I would recommend anybody actually try and use, but Thunderbolt sometimes is actually needed if you're connecting a external video card or a high-speed storage device. But typically, if you're buying an external Thunderbolt connected video card or storage device, you're paying through the nose because it's Thunderbolt. XES is a lot of Intel's frame generation upscaling technologies that I don't think people are really going to care about or want. This announcement is really just a prelude to an announcement of some actual handheld device, not just a mock-up like this. And when an actual handheld device comes out and has this chip, or one of these variants of these chips, then that's when we'll start to really see performance comparisons. See, 2 processor cores, or power cores, with 8 efficiency cores, and then 4 more low power cores. Doesn't scream particularly powerful as far as a chip goes, even for mobile. Let's see, a stylish 2.5D action brawler called Skyroider Rumble brings in a weird Brazilian-inspired cartoon world. Brazilian-inspired cartoon world? Not sure what Brazilian inspired cartoons look like. Yeah. I don't know what I would really describe this animation as, so I guess Brazilian inspired cartoons are a new thing to me. I'd have to really think if there ever has been any other Brazilian cartoons that I've seen. Very possibly I haven't. This might be more of a case that it is a cartoon that is inspired by Brazil than it is a video game inspired by a Brazilian cartoon style. Generally, I would say this looks maybe a little Australian inspired in culture and just 3D CGI and animation style. It does look interesting as a game, though, so I'll put it on the follow list. Let's see. It's too easy to get obsessed with the auto battler Oaken Tower. Which I imagine he's not saying that as an actual bad thing. It does look like there's a lot going on here. It could end up taking too much of your time. It is an online PvP game, so I wouldn't ever actually play it. And yeah, the number of people playing is going to drastically affect your experience, because if people stop playing it, then there's nothing to do. Let's see, Rain Games, I guess formerly known as Tesla Grad, put up a demo for Knucklejet, an off-the-wall jetpunk ricochet action platformer. Yeah. Looks like it might be something. Well, that reminds me, there's this VTuber named Iron Mouse who's very popular, and I saw on Reddit that part of the reason why she VTubes is because she has a disability, and apparently through a lot of hard work and physical therapy, her disability has gotten a little bit better, which good for her. Always nice to hear some positive news for anybody with severe disability, and certainly nice to see where the lucky few that do become successful on YouTube aren't all the healthiest of and most pretty and most popular people, although the vast majority of the ones that YouTube want to be successful are the healthiest, prettiest, most popular people living in usually New York or LA. Yeah. Let's see, moving on, a Fruit Ninja designer has revealed normal golf game with a demo. There's nothing normal about it. Not a Fruit Ninja designer, I guess the Fruit Ninja designer. Yeah. And I would assume there's a whole bunch of silliness there, but from the screenshots, it is being, I think, pretty deceptive in what it's showing. Yeah. Moving on, Mango HUD version 0.8.4 has been released. It should fix the Steam overlay not working. Some other updates and changes, I imagine, too. A big Steam update is out now, plus the Steam Workshop upgrade is rolling out for everyone. I assume Big Steam is not Steam Big Picture mode. brings the beta from earlier in April out to everyone, bringing a new browsing UI to the Steam Workshop into a much more modern setting. Yep. Valve basically working on Steam as a website, Steam client as an application, Steam OS as an operating system, and several other smaller assistive programs for Steam OS as an operating system, all at the same time, all fairly consistently getting updates. Yeah, we've talked to death the Steam Deck stock returning with a huge price increase. Hytale updates 5 brings controller support, a new scripting tool for modders, and social features. Hytale is the very inspired by Minecraft type game. You can fight off deadly swarms in a big space hive in the latest No Man's Sky update. Well, I also saw that apparently, not No Man's Sky, but another one of those space games that's been in early access for decades has blown through their budget and is once again trying to raise funds by selling unfinished, unplayable ships. Don't remember the name of the game though. But, yeah. Generally, I think people are unhappy with the state of that game never being finished and all of that, but I imagine the people who are actually playing the game and paying through the nose for the development of the game may be less perturbed by yet another round of raising funds in a product that is labeled as unfinished, and maybe there's just a danger there in that at some point you need to stop adding features and release your game as a version 1.0 so people can stop saying, hey, your game has been in early access forever. No Man's Sky was in very bad states when it originally launched, and they kept working on it without asking for more money, and they have in recent years been able to create an amazing game, which in fairness at a 10-year point they should stop adding new content and they should be working on a sequel, because yeah, you're getting off way too easy now, potentially paying $25 for No Man's Sky. Again, though, this may be a case where online is a big factor here and the single player experience may not be anywhere as good as the online experience, and as long as people are playing online, they should probably focus on supporting online. The classic strategy game Empire's Earth 1, 2, and 3 have arrived on Steam. They were already on Good Old Games. None of them seem to have been updated at all. There are community patches to add online back into the game. So apparently these are classic real-time strategy games, but I didn't recognize them at all when I saw them. They looked like Ages of Empires, certainly, but yeah. I have no idea what year that came out. Yeah, Witcher Wild Hunt 3 Songs of the Past DLC is announced. They're calling it DLC. Most of the places were calling it DLC. It seems like CD Projekt Red was in particular suggesting it as an expansion. Weirdly, they are changing the system requirements too, so they are asking for more, which is kind of crazy to have an expansion from a game or a DLC for a game change the system requirements. Again, Don't know when that came out. Yeah. Don't know if I could actually make content based on Witcher 3. Just because of the nudity in it in the game. Don't see a real reason why I'd want to make content around Witcher 3. I did like Witcher 3 quite a bit, but that central part of the main story got grindy, and we are talking 11 years ago, so I'm not sure if it's particularly that relevant. Witcher 3 also is a great example of a game that I got relatively early, tried to play very early, and it just did not help me with YouTube in any way. Too many people were playing the game, too many people had already heard of the game. I wasn't really highlighting a game that people hadn't already heard of. So even if I did get the DLC and start playing it on day one, I would just be playing it with a whole bunch of other people and still probably wouldn't get that many views or any views at all. As one thing about scheduling videos once again on my channel and getting back to having my channel actually churn out content is that there is a small hope now that things would be different and I'd get a whole bunch more views and the algorithm would just treat things better. I don't know why that would happen, but there's always that hope. Steam Beta fixes Steam controllers for Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and other issues being solved. Doesn't seem like this beta update did too much though. Alright, that's going to bring us to GameDeveloper.com articles. The Balatro publisher PlayStack is being sold to GameStop and Fandom's parent company. The proposed majority takeover values the UK publisher at $169 million. I'd assume that is US dollars and not pounds. Yeah, I guess it would have to be US dollars. Yeah. 007 First Light has topped 1.5 million sales. License the Thrill. Look how small this article is, though. Just one sentence, really, as far as a news brief that feels like it was just copy and pasted from what was handed them. Yeah. That's incredibly short. I would rather incredibly short, though, compared to potentially stretched out for no reason or written by AI, which I've never caught GameDeveloper.com or any of my news sources of using AI, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of the articles are AI assisted. We talked about this in the last stream. The Remedy Entertainment CEO thinks Alan Wake and Control should have sold more, which is a huge red flag to me when you have somebody in charge like a CEO coming out and saying that, because it tells me they're not living in reality and they're not living in the present. So they're not focused on the next Alan Wake or the next Control games as much as they should be. The Rockstar Game Workers Union breaks cover. Quote, "We're demanding to win justice for the 31 fired workers." This was the people were fired allegedly for leaking information, but they're claiming, the union is claiming they were fired because they were actually talking about their jobs and trying to unionize. Which, yeah, they almost certainly were fired for unionization efforts. And definitely, if you are a union member or a person who believes in solidarity in any ways, or even knows what solidarity means, it's not even really taught to people. There is a real argument to not buy Rockstar games, including the next GTA, as long as they are firing people and union busting and fighting against this union. We may not be at the point where unions themselves are calling for a consumer boycott, but even if they're not calling for that, it definitely should be in the back of your mind that money right now going to Rockstar is going to a management that is anti-union. Almost certainly, like most managements are anti-union. And I'll leave it at that. There's a report that payment for some of the gamer staff is now tied to per article sessions. Parent company ValveNet describes the new payment scheme as a new and exciting performance-based bonus system. This would be a parent company of websites like Game Rant and DualShockers, which I'm not sure anything about those news sources, but I imagine they're probably not that good. It goes from a flat rate structure based on how many sessions an article gets, which almost certainly means that you're going to get paid less, or at least there will be a question as far as how that you'll get less. Sessions in this case means how many people actually go to the website based on your article alone. Yeah, I really don't have to read any further to put my opinion out here. Basically, news is contradictory to the concept of capitalism. And it just is. News, like the post office, like healthcare, are really services that need to be provided to the public to make the public a better entity as a whole, and as such, how much they cost really shouldn't be a factor. Unfortunately, capitalism corrupts everything, particularly the late stage capitalism we live in these days. So yeah, the right way for news sites to really exist would be something like a corporation for public broadcasting system where people, rich people in particular, get taxed, and then the money that comes from their taxing being taxed goes directly to the news, reporting about all the horrible thing the rich people are doing that is making them stay rich in a lot of ways, to just try and balance out that imbalance a little bit. And then also there should be way more laws than there are these days as far as rich people owning newspapers in general. The thought of the internet in the old days is that independent news journalists could just form their own sites and run it has unfortunately died, as those independent news journal sites have fallen apart and sold out. And we are getting very much back to giant mega corporations owning the company, owning the news, including GameDeveloper.com. But yeah, this per session, per article sessions payment scheme is almost certainly designed to pay less. So if we get into the real details here, they're earning $5 per every 1,000 sessions. Clicks and editors will earn $3 per every 1,000 sessions. This rate only applies to the first 15 days per post. If the article gets fewer than 1,000 sessions, the writer doesn't get paid at all in those 15 days. So, yeah, this is a terrible system, basically designed to pay nothing to article writers. And if anything, the only way around this would be to potentially spend $5 to then bot your own articles and just have bots click on articles like crazy, or have a conceited effort of people go and click on these articles and bought these articles so that they have to pay much more reasonable amounts. You know, an article, depending on the quality of the article, really should be about $50 minimum. Honestly, it's not worth a lot of people's time in the Western world to write an article for less than $50, even if they were only writing a 4 or 5 sentence article, because we actually want them to get facts straight and not rush through it like crazy. Realistically, if you're actually doing research and putting real effort into it, $250 is also a very reasonable amount for an article. $500 for an article is not super crazy. Even $1,000 for an article if you're working on that article for weeks and weeks, interviewing people, doing follow-ups, things like that. Video game wise, those kinds of articles get written very rarely, but $5 certainly is ridiculous. And very quickly you're going to see that they are going to start dismissing or lying about how many clicks / sessions. And they're saying sessions in particular because that doesn't mean that one website, one browser, one person can click on the same article 5 times and give them 5 views. Unfortunately, this was probably a lot better than what a YouTube content creator gets paid. If we're going to really throw that out there, as far as a small time, barely in the partner program YouTube content creator. I'm not even in the partner program anymore, so yeah, still trying to get a ton more watch time to get to that point. Maybe my blueprints videos would get me a ton more watch time, but I don't know. And I have no guarantee that even if I did meet the requirements, I'd actually get approved by YouTube. Yeah, that is terrible. Let's see. A global game jam launches micro grant program to support indies and emerging talent. The non-profit organization wants to unite indie studios with aspiring professionals by facilitating paid micro projects. This is an interesting thought, I suppose, but it also just shows the split between game jam games and micro projects and what gamers actually want. Yeah, I don't think there really is a huge audience of people that actually want to play a game that is labeled as a micro project. Small games are fine. Mini games, maybe not. And then micro is smaller than mini. And this feels like what you're funding is a lot of people who are going to be better off either working in a company and learning from working around other people, or even interning in a video game company and learning the way games are developed for real. It definitely feels like when you get to these game jams and just throwing money at indie people that they are perhaps teaching themselves very badly the way to make games, which is not going to be compatible with the way to make bigger games and make games that scale. Yeah. I doubt there are any self-taught indie developers working at like CD Projekt Red or Fool's Theory, which is also co-developing this expansion. Yeah. Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is getting a new expansion 12 years after launch. We talked about that. And then that brings us to all the new games on Steam. So now that I have my scheduling macros up, I am one step closer to potentially getting back to making YouTube shorts but I don't think I'm really that much closer to doing that. There's still a lot of work I wanted to do to improve that. And there's a lot of other stuff to schedule and focus on too. Yeah. This game is mostly negative already, so I'm going to take it off. So what I'm doing here is going through all the new games on Steam. When I swipe down, that means I'm closing the tab because I don't think it's even worth pretending like I'm going to make a YouTube short on it. Giant boob anime girls should have been in the adult section. This feels like a Katamari Damacy inspired game. If I'm swiping to the right, that means I'm leaving the tab open. Yeah, and if I'm putting it on a follow list, that means I want to check back on it later. Here we have another co-op escape game, which I don't know where they get the idea that fans of puzzle games have friends that also are fans of puzzle games, although maybe they are thinking it is more of a case that people who are fans of escape rooms have friends, which I would question if there is enough of those also, because it does feel like the fad of escape rooms is probably winding down a bit. 0% out of 23 user reviews. This is by far the most negative reviewed game I've ever seen. That basically guarantees it doesn't even run. We're seeing several backrooms games. At the moment, we're looking at games that support English, I think, and every other language except for exclusively Russian. Too many scam games. Exclusively Russian. And we're looking at games that have AI in it, which eventually there is a plan to slightly automate the curation a little bit more and close things that don't support English, close things that maybe have AI in them, maybe don't. Yeah. But even if I did automate that, I'm still going to have a significant number of games that I'm going through every stream, and I don't have any better way of curating it automatically, and any kind of automatic curation is going to have some kind of percentage of error compared to what my own attention would want to have. I still think it is somewhat valuable to look at all the new games on Steam, but it really is just every time solidifying that there is a lot of garbage that gets put on Steam, and then there is stuff that bothers to put out a press release and be talked about by one of my news sources, and then there's garbage. And there seems to be almost never any hidden gems that go missed. A big part of that too is that these games that we're looking at don't have release dates often, which that might be a way of curating. That is a metric that is actually controllable. If I did just have every page check to see if it actually has a release date and then close it until it actually does update its Steam page to have a release date, which often they'll put out announcements and not update. That would get rid of a decent number of these games we're looking at. And in fairness, there's, I think, a lot of these games that straight up put out release dates and then never actually release. Which, as far as I can tell, Steam doesn't seem to do anything about that for things that miss their release date. Maybe they do something on the back end, but I've never really seen a game that I was planning on playing and seeing it completely disappear. Lexi spell needs more user reviews. And there are definitely games like this that are ridiculous and should never have been on Steam in the first place. And then there's potentially games like this where it might be something. Probably isn't anything, but it might be something. And a lot of it has come down to me no longer even really applying my own desires and taste as far as what games make it to the follow list and what games this almost certainly is AI assisted. Yeah. I did get a mouth guard. I've had this weird sharp tooth that I think my tongue is just stupidly obsessing about and rubbing, and so gotten a mouth guard. I'm not wearing it right now. I do think I would sound pretty ridiculous if I tried to speak in it. Nor was I fully comfortable sleeping in it. So now it is definitely going to be a struggle to just find times to put it in and actually use it before it becomes incredibly gross, which is, I imagine, going to happen pretty quickly. It is a kind of rubbery plastic, so I could cut it down. It might need a little bit of that. And the set I got was 2 small ones and 2 large ones, which inherently tells you that the plastic is not of any real value, that they can just give you 2 extras they almost certainly are not going to be using. Lone Girl, just by the thumbnail, should be dismissed. I don't know why I'm even looking at it. And that may be a great example of them already getting rid of the not safe for work tag, and people now just not labeling their games at all when they're doing Bikini Babe asset flips. But yeah, getting rid of not safe for work and mature and forcing people to label their game as having sexual content is almost certainly going to lead to more people just not using any labels at all. Yeah. Like this game that does have nudity and hentai as tags. Which those tags, thank goodness, didn't get eliminated. Yet, I do have a fear that maybe the hentai tag will have all games with that tag eliminated from Steam, or shoved away into some kind of other quarantine zone. And anything with sexual content, even, I do have a fear that it too might get quarantined or eliminated. But yeah, the way these payment processors are invoking debanking wouldn't even really allow for like Steam to accept cryptocurrency for certain games only. Yeah. They clearly have an agenda and want only one outcome, which is those kinds of adult games which people actually want to buy and pay money for, being unable to buy. Yeah. Legally, I think you would describe it as tortious interference, but suing a bank and succeeding is going to be hard, to say the least. Speaking of legalese, apparently there's a big deal, and as somebody who has a whole bunch of Lego that they haven't put together, where an 80-year-old man sold a bunch of unopened Lego boxes, or didn't sell them, he co-signed them to a franchisee Lego store reseller, and instead of selling the Lego sets on their behalf, they did some legalese, filed for bankruptcy, and stole what is estimated to be $80,000, which is a lot of Lego, but not that much worth of Lego. And there's just been this increasing legal nonsense going on where they are continuously selling sets they don't seem to legally have the rights to. Apparently when you co-sign things, you have to file a federal form that's like $20 to protect you from what happened there. But if somebody is trying to do something nefarious, which it seems like they are, then I don't know how much protection of anything, any kind of legal protection, is going to help you that much. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of YouTube drama also around this story. But yeah, it's another great example of somebody saving up and trying to... Interesting, some updates for Deadlock. Haven't seen that in a while. Somebody trying to just make some money for themselves to pay for their kids going to college, or grandkids going to college, and some other scammer stepping in and disenfranchising / robbing someone who's trying to do a relatively honest thing of co-signing and selling Legos. There's been a lot of people who have been saving Legos as a kind of investment. Not me in particular, but you know, if I found an easy way to sell them, I might consider doing that. Oh yeah, and I did just realize that I had a whole bunch of like shelves designed to put my Lego sets on, and then I bought a whole bunch more, and I now just put some of the old shelves next to the new shelves, and I'm realizing that they are not the same color at all. One is black and one is more a cherry wood. Not really that big of a deal. It was always a plan to put the old shelves on one side of the room and the new shelves on the other side of the room, so a separation there is not that big of an issue. It would have been nice if I wasn't an idiot and got the same thing, color, but I'm not sure the same color would have even been available. And yeah, at some point, if I need to redecorate and move half the shelves into one room and half the shelves into another, that stops being an issue altogether. Alright, well, this is about the average length of one of these streams, and we went through it fairly well. So that's going to be it for this stream. Let's cross our fingers and see if I get another 25 subscribers. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos so I can get a lot more watch time. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.